You have tolerated disrespect for so long that it started to feel normal. Small comments disguised as jokes, subtle dismissals disguised as honesty. People speaking over you, overlooking you, undervaluing you, not because they are stronger than you, but because you trained them to believe there was no cost to crossing you. Disrespect is not random. It is a market, and you have been giving discounts. Every time you laughed off an insult to keep the peace, you lowered your price. Every time you allowed someone to speak to you in a way they would never dare speak to a man they feared, you signaled weakness. Every time you explained yourself to someone who had no intention of understanding you, you surrendered authority. This is the brutal truth Machiavelli understood long before modern psychology gave it language. People treat you based on the consequences you enforce, not the values you preach. A prince who forgives everything is not loved, he is ignored. A prince who reacts emotionally is not respected, he is studied. But a prince who makes disrespect expensive becomes untouchable. Tonight you learn the art that weak men avoid, because it requires discipline, restraint, and the willingness to be misunderstood, the art of raising the cost of crossing you. Niccolò Machiavelli observed rulers who ruled by affection and rulers who ruled by fear. The ones who relied only on affection were eventually betrayed. The ones who relied only on fear were eventually overthrown. But the ones who mastered calculated consequence, those were the ones who endured. Because human beings are not guided by morality as much as they are guided by incentives. They repeat behaviors that are rewarded and abandon behaviors that are punished. This is not cynicism. This is mechanics. If someone disrespects you and nothing happens, they learn that disrespect is safe. If someone disrespects you and you explode emotionally, they learn that provoking you is entertaining. But if someone disrespects you and your response is cold, precise, and costly, they learn a lesson they will never forget. Most men misunderstand what it means to command respect. They think it comes from physical dominance, loudness, or intimidation. Machiavelli knew better. True authority comes from predictability, not emotional predictability, but strategic predictability. People must know that crossing you produces consequences every single time. You do not need to shout. You do not need to threaten. You do not need to posture. You simply become a man whose boundaries are enforced with surgical consistency. Think about the lion Machiavelli described. The lion does not roar at every animal in the jungle. He roars only when necessary. Most of the time, his presence alone is enough, because the jungle remembers what happens when the lion is tested. Your life must become that jungle. The first step to making disrespect expensive is understanding that tolerance of disrespect is not kindness, it is self-betrayal. You were taught that being the bigger person meant absorbing mistreatment silently. You were told that reacting makes you weak. But what they never explained is that failing to enforce boundaries teaches others that your dignity is negotiable. And once people believe your dignity is negotiable, they will bargain it down to nothing. Machiavelli wrote that injuries must either be crushed completely or not inflicted at all, because if you wound someone lightly, they will seek revenge. But if you destroy their ability to harm you, they cannot retaliate. Apply this to modern life, and the principle becomes clear. Half measures invite repeated disrespect. Weak responses encourage stronger offenses. When people see hesitation, they push further. This is why powerful men do not argue about respect. They demonstrate the cost of disrespect once, and the lesson spreads without words. Disrespect thrives in environments where consequences are uncertain. In workplaces, the man who laughs at being undermined becomes the man who is always undermined. In relationships, the man who tolerates subtle contempt eventually receives open contempt. In social circles, the man who allows jokes at his expense becomes the punchline permanently. Not because people are evil, but because people test limits instinctively. They probe for weakness the way water searches for cracks. Your job is not to hate them for this. Your job is to remove the cracks. Here is the paradox most men cannot grasp. Making disrespect expensive is not about aggression, it is about withdrawal of benefits. When someone crosses you, you do not need to attack them. You remove access, you remove cooperation, you remove warmth. You remove the privileges they once enjoyed. Humans fear loss more than punishment. The colleague who undermines you loses your assistance. The friend who disrespects you loses your presence. The partner who dismisses you loses your emotional availability. You do not announce it, you do not dramatize it, you simply adjust your behavior and let the silence explain everything. Machiavelli would call this controlled cruelty, not cruelty driven by emotion, but cruelty deployed strategically to preserve order. Because without consequence, disorder spreads. You must also understand that disrespect often comes disguised as familiarity. People feel safest crossing the man who tries hardest to be liked. The more accessible you are, the more casual people become with you. The more casual they become, the more likely they are to forget your value. Familiarity without boundaries breeds contempt. This is why powerful men maintain a degree of distance even with those they care about. Not coldness, distance. Enough space that their presence retains weight. When you are always available, you become background noise. When you are selectively available, you become an event. Scarcity creates value. Value commands respect. You must become scarce in ways that matter. Speak less so your words carry weight. Appear less so your presence becomes noticeable. Give less so your contributions feel significant. The goal is not isolation. The goal is calibration. Machiavelli believed that a ruler must control perception as carefully as he controls reality. If people perceive you as someone who cannot be crossed without consequence, most will never attempt it. Respect, enforced once, saves you from enforcing it repeatedly. Now we arrive at the most dangerous misconception weak men hold. They believe making disrespect expensive will make people dislike them. It will. And that is the point. Respect and universal approval cannot coexist. The man who is loved by everyone is feared by no one. The man who fears being disliked becomes easy to control. Machiavelli warned that it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. In modern terms, it is better to be respected with a hint of distance than liked with hidden contempt. When you raise the cost of disrespect, some people will withdraw. Let them. Those who benefited from your weakness will resent your strength. Those who relied on your compliance will call you arrogant. Those who were comfortable crossing you will accuse you of changing. You did change. You stopped being easy to disrespect. And the ones who remain, the ones who adjust their behavior, the ones who meet your standards, the ones who recognize your value, those are the people worthy of staying in your world. Power is not about controlling everyone. Power is about filtering who remains. From this moment forward, understand this law of human behavior. People do not respect what they can violate without consequence. Your silence will no longer be permission. Your patience will no longer be misinterpreted as weakness. Your calm will no longer be mistaken for submission. You are about to become a man whose composure hides something far more dangerous, limits that cannot be crossed without cost. And once people realize that disrespecting you comes with a price they cannot afford, they will do something remarkable. They will start respecting you without being asked. This is where your transformation begins, because the moment disrespect becomes expensive, your peace becomes priceless. And the man who protects his peace at all costs becomes a force the world learns to move around rather than against. Most men fail at this stage because they confuse making disrespect expensive with reacting emotionally. They think the goal is to punish, to dominate, to humiliate. That is not power. That is insecurity wearing armor. True Machiavellian strategy is colder than anger and quieter than revenge. When a powerful man is disrespected, he does not erupt. He recalculates. Because emotion is expensive. Strategy is profitable. The moment you react impulsively, you surrender control of the situation to the person who provoked you. They dictated your state. They pulled the strings, and you moved exactly as they predicted. You became entertainment instead of authority. Machiavelli observed that rulers who governed by impulse were easy to manipulate. Their enemies simply had to provoke them into mistakes. But the ruler who remained composed forced everyone else to operate on his terms. You must become that man. The second principle of making disrespect expensive is delayed consequence. Immediate retaliation feels satisfying, but teaches nothing. It turns the interaction into a clash of egos instead of a lesson in hierarchy. But when your response comes later, colder, and calculated, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is a psychological weapon. Imagine this scenario. Someone undermines you publicly expecting a reaction. Instead, you say nothing. You remain calm. You even appear unaffected. They relax, believing they got away with it. Days later, they discover they are no longer included in opportunities they once had. Doors quietly close. Support disappears. Their access fades without explanation. Now they are confused. Confusion turns into anxiety. Anxiety turns into self-correction. You did not attack them. You altered the environment. Machiavelli would call this shaping fortune rather than fighting it. You do not waste energy confronting every offense directly. You redesign reality so that those who cross you find themselves isolated by their own actions. This method achieves two goals simultaneously. It punishes the offender and warns observers without open conflict. Because power displayed quietly spreads faster than power displayed loudly. There is another layer most men never understand. Disrespect is often a test, not a statement. People probe to discover your thresholds. They want to know how far they can go before consequences appear. Weak men answer this test with negotiation. Powerful men answer this test with finality. No debate, no lecture. No explanation, just a shift in behavior that communicates, that will not happen again. Your body language becomes colder, your tone becomes shorter, your availability decreases. You do not pretend nothing happened. You simply stop offering the warmth they once took for granted. Humans are hypersensitive to social temperature changes. They feel when energy withdraws. They feel when access disappears. They feel when they are no longer welcome in the same way. And because you did not create drama, they cannot accuse you of hostility. The burden of interpretation falls on them. This is psychological leverage. Machiavelli taught that a prince must avoid being hated while still being feared. The way to achieve this is through controlled responses that maintain order without appearing tyrannical. In modern life, this translates to being firm without being volatile. You do not explode. You do not insult. You do not threaten. You simply become less available to those who violated your standards. Availability is currency. Withdrawal is taxation. Now let us address the hardest part of this discipline, internal control. Disrespect triggers something primal. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tighten. Your mind floods with arguments you want to unleash. Every instinct tells you to defend yourself immediately. This is biology, not weakness. But Machiavellian mastery requires overriding instinct with intention. The Stoics trained themselves to see insult as information rather than injury. Machiavelli trained leaders to see offense as opportunity rather than attack. Opportunity for what? Opportunity to reveal character. When someone disrespects you, they expose their nature. their insecurity, their lack of discipline. They show you exactly how much trust they deserve. Most men waste this revelation by reacting emotionally instead of using it strategically. From now on, every instance of disrespect becomes data. Who did it? Where did it happen? What did they gain from it? What boundary failed to hold? This transforms you from a victim into an analyst. And the analyst always wins, because once you understand patterns, you can predict behavior. Once you can predict behavior, you can control outcomes. Another crucial element Machiavelli emphasized was reputation. A single decisive response can reshape how people perceive you for years. Think about the man in any environment who is known for not tolerating nonsense. He rarely has to enforce boundaries because his reputation enforces them for him. People whisper warnings to each other. Do not try that with him. Your goal is not constant confrontation. Your goal is building a reputation that prevents confrontation from being necessary. This requires consistency. One day of strength followed by a week of tolerance resets everything. People will test you again to see if the line still exists. Your standards must be permanent, not situational. And this is where most men collapse. They enforce boundaries when they feel confident and abandon them when they feel tired, lonely, or uncertain. Power does not operate on mood. Power operates on principle. Machiavelli's prince did not wake up each day deciding whether to maintain order. Maintaining order was his duty regardless of how he felt. Your self-respect must operate the same way. It is not a performance. It is policy. When disrespect appears, policy activates. No anger required, no discussion necessary, just enforcement. You will notice something fascinating as you master this discipline. The people who once tested you will begin treating you carefully. They will choose their words more cautiously. They will watch your reactions more closely. Not because you intimidated them, but because you trained them. Humans adapt to incentives faster than they adapt to arguments. And once people understand that disrespecting you leads to loss of access, loss of cooperation, loss of status in your world, they will adjust automatically. The final component of making disrespect expensive is selective forgiveness. Not everyone deserves permanent exile. Some people cross lines out of ignorance rather than malice. The powerful man distinguishes between the two. If someone corrects their behavior consistently, access can be restored gradually, but never fully to its previous level. The memory of consequence must remain alive. Machiavelli warned that mercy without memory invites future betrayal. You can forgive without forgetting. You can restore without surrendering. This balance prevents you from becoming either a tyrant or a doormat. Because the ultimate goal is not revenge. The ultimate goal is order in your life. A life where your peace is protected, your value is recognized, and your presence is treated with the seriousness it deserves. By now, the shift is already happening inside you. You are beginning to see disrespect not as something to endure, but as something to regulate, not as a personal wound, but as a behavioral violation, and violations have consequences. Soon, the world around you will recalibrate. The same people who once spoke casually will choose their words carefully. The same ones who overlooked you will acknowledge you. The same ones who tested you will avoid doing so again. Not because you demanded respect, but because you made disrespect unaffordable. And when disrespect becomes unaffordable, respect becomes inevitable. Now you understand the mechanics. You understand the strategy, but none of it matters unless you become the kind of man who can execute it without hesitation, because knowledge without embodiment is decoration. Power only respects action. The final stage of making disrespect expensive is transformation of identity. You are no longer a man who occasionally enforces boundaries. You become a man whose very presence discourages violations before they occur. Machiavelli observed that the most effective rulers did not rely on constant punishment because their reputation made punishment rarely necessary. Their image traveled ahead of them like a shadow. By the time they entered a room, order was already established. This is what you are building, an aura of consequence. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is felt. The untouchable man does not scan the room for threats. The room adjusts to him automatically. Conversations shift when he approaches. Disrespect dissolves before it reaches him. Not because he demanded this treatment, but because people sense the cost of crossing him. This is the paradox of power. The more controlled you become internally, the less control you need externally. You do not glare, you do not posture, you do not attempt to dominate space. You simply exist, with a calm that signals you cannot be manipulated, rushed, or provoked. And calm terrifies those who rely on chaos to gain advantage. Most disrespect comes from opportunists. They look for emotional reactions they can exploit, insecurity they can amplify, hesitation they can push through. When they find none, they move on to easier targets. You become the difficult target, but this transformation demands something from you that weak men refuse to give: the abandonment of the need to be understood. Some people will misinterpret your silence as arrogance. Some will call you cold. Some will say you have changed. Let them. Machiavelli warned that a prince who tries to satisfy everyone ends up losing himself. Leadership requires the courage to be misunderstood by those who benefit from misunderstanding you. Your responsibility is not to manage their perception. Your responsibility is to maintain your standards. And here is the final truth most men discover too late. Making disrespect expensive also changes how you see yourself. Each time you enforce a boundary, your self-respect grows. Each time you refuse to tolerate what once drained you, your confidence becomes quieter but stronger. Each time you walk away, instead of arguing, you reinforce the belief that your peace is worth protecting. You stop seeking validation because you no longer doubt your value. This is how internal power is forged, not through victories over others, but through discipline over yourself. Eventually, something extraordinary happens. You no longer think about disrespect at all, because it rarely happens. The same world that once treated you casually now treats you carefully. The same people who once overlooked you now consider you. The same environments that once drained you now feel different, calmer, more controlled. Not because the world changed, because you did. You became a man whose boundaries are invisible but undeniable. A man whose silence carries warning. A man whose absence feels heavier than his presence once did. Machiavelli would say, "You have learned the art of controlled severity, the ability to enforce order without constant force. From this point forward, you do not chase respect. You attract it by making disrespect too costly to attempt. And if someone still chooses to cross you, despite all signals, despite all reputation, despite all restraint, you will not argue. You will not threaten. You will not even raise your voice. You will simply remove them from your world with a precision so clean it feels like they were never there. No drama, no explanation, no second chances without proof of change. Because your life is not a courtroom where everyone deserves a defense. It is a kingdom where access is earned. This is the final lesson Machiavelli left for those capable of understanding him. Power is not proven by how many enemies you destroy, but by how few dare to challenge you at all. You are no longer available for disrespect. You are no longer reachable through provocation. You are no longer negotiable. You have become a man whose peace is guarded, whose value is recognized, and whose silence carries more authority than most people's words. This is how you make disrespect expensive, not through anger, not through violence, but through unwavering standards, strategic withdrawal, and the quiet certainty that your presence is a privilege, not a right. From this moment forward, anyone who enters your life does so, knowing one thing clearly: respect is the price of admission, and those who cannot afford it will never get close enough to matter. If this awakens something in you, subscribe now, because the next lesson will make you even harder to ignore, harder to manipulate, and impossible to disrespect.